Story 1. The Man Who Paid with Time. I looked down at the 2 coins in my palm, felt their impossible weight, and when I raised my eyes to the glass divider, my reflection stared back. But its lips weren't moving with mine. My name is Glenn Forrester, and I've operated the ticket booth at Riverside Central Station for 11 years. The graveyard shift, specifically 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., 4 nights a week. It's repetitive work, the kind that makes hours blur into a single continuous loop of transactions, automated announcements, and the distant rumble of trains pulling through tunnels older than most of the city's buildings. I prefer it that way. Predictable, contained. The booth is a small universe of bulletproof glass, laminated schedules, and the faint metallic smell of coins that have passed through 10,000 hands. The passengers who come through at this hour are a particular breed. Shift workers heading home, insomniacs riding circles until dawn, occasionally someone running from something they won't name. I don't ask questions. I sell tickets, make change, give directions when needed. My interactions are transactional, courteous, forgettable. That's the nature of the job. You become part of the infrastructure. Seen but not noticed, functional but not memorable. He first appeared on a Tuesday in late September. I remember because Tuesdays are the slowest nights, and I'd been reading the maintenance log when the fluorescent lights above my counter flickered once, then steadied. I glanced up. A man stood at my window, hands folded, waiting with the patience of someone who had all the time in the world. He wore a long wool coat, old-fashioned but well-maintained, and a hat pulled low enough that I couldn't quite see his eyes in the overhead lighting. "1 ticket, please," he said. His voice was even, almost formal. "Southbound." "Which stop?" I asked, fingers already moving toward the ticket printer. "The end of the line." I printed the ticket, slid it through the gap in the glass. "That'll be $3.50. He reached into his coat pocket and withdrew a coin, placing it gently on the metal tray. The moment it touched the surface, the lights flickered again. Longer this time, a full 2 seconds of dimness before they returned. I picked up the coin and froze. It wasn't modern currency. The metal was tarnished, the edges worn smooth, but I could still make out the date embossed near the rim, 1887. The design was unfamiliar, almost ornamental, with symbols I didn't recognize. I looked up to ask about it, but he was already walking toward the platform, his footsteps echoing in the empty concourse. I should have called after him, should have told him the fare was incorrect. But something stopped me. A strange heaviness in the air, the way my breath seemed to hang visible for just a moment despite the station's warmth. Instead, I slipped the coin into my pocket and made a note to report it to my supervisor in the morning. When I glanced at my wristwatch, it read 2:11 a.m. I could have sworn it had been 2:17 just moments before. He came back the next night. Same time, 2:17 a.m. exactly. Same coat, same posture, same request. 1 ticket southbound, end of the line. This time I watched more carefully. The lights flickered the instant he approached, and when he placed another antique coin on the tray, I felt a strange pressure behind my eyes, like the beginning of a migraine. My watch, which I'd checked obsessively throughout the shift, lost 6 minutes between the time he arrived and the time he walked away. I didn't mention it to anyone. How could I? A man paid with old coins and my watch runs slow sounded absurd even in my own head. But I started keeping a log, noting the exact time he appeared, the duration of the light flickers, the minutes lost. Over the next 2 weeks, the pattern held with mechanical precision. Every night I worked, he appeared at 2:17 a.m. Every night the lights dimmed. Every night my watch fell further behind. The coins accumulated in my pocket. I didn't turn them in, didn't deposit them in the fare drawer. I told myself it was evidence. something concrete I could eventually present to someone who might understand. But the truth was more unsettling. The coins felt warm against my leg, almost alive, and the thought of separating from them filled me with an inexplicable dread. By the third week, I started noticing other changes. The station's ambient sounds seemed muffled when he was present, as though we existed in a bubble slightly removed from normal time. I could see other passengers moving through the concourse in my peripheral vision, but they moved sluggishly, their voices stretched and distorted. And my reflection in the booth's glass divider began to bother me. Nothing I could pinpoint exactly, just a sense that it wasn't quite synchronized, that it moved a fraction of a second after I did. I researched the coins during my off hours. None of the numismatic databases had any record of them. The symbols etched into the metal resembled no known currency. One forum suggested they might be tokens from a private transit company. But even those records stopped in the 1920s. The date, 1887, predated the station itself by 30 years. Whatever they were, they shouldn't exist. Last night, he came as always. 2:17 a.m. The lights flickered longer than before, nearly 5 seconds of brownout that made the backup systems click on with a mechanical whir. He approached the window and placed his hands flat on the counter. And for the first time, I saw his face clearly. It was ageless, neither young nor old, with eyes that reflected the fluorescent lighting in a way that seemed wrong. Too bright, too focused, like polished glass. "1 ticket," he said, but this time he placed 2 coins on the tray. "I don't understand," I said, my voice barely steady. "Why 2? "1 for the journey," he replied, "and 1 for the operator." The pressure behind my eyes became unbearable. The station sounds cut out entirely, replaced by a high-pitched ringing that seemed to emanate from inside my skull. I looked down at the coins, and both dated 1887, both warm to the touch, and when I picked them up, my wristwatch stopped completely. The second hand froze, the mechanism silent. I looked up to ask what he meant, and that's when I saw it. My reflection in the glass divider was still frozen mid-motion while I continued to move. I raised my hand slowly, and the reflection remained static, its hand still resting on the counter where mine had been seconds before. "What's happening to me?" I whispered. The man's expression didn't change. "You've been riding this shift for a long time, Mr. Forrester. Longer than you remember. The fare comes due eventually." He turned and walked toward the platform, disappearing into the tunnel entrance. I wanted to follow to demand answers, but my body felt leaden, anchored to the booth by invisible weight. When I looked at the schedule board above the concourse, the time read 2:17 a.m. I checked the station's master clock. 2:17 a.m. I refreshed my computer terminal. 2:17 a.m. My shift should have ended hours ago. The morning operator should have arrived, should have knocked on the booth door to take over. But the corridor beyond my window remains empty, the station frozen in the perpetual moment of his arrival. I've tried the door. It won't open. I've tried the emergency radio. Static. Nothing else. The trains still run through the station, but they don't stop. They pass through the platform like ghosts, their windows dark, their interiors empty. The 2 coins sit on my counter, warm and waiting. My reflection in the glass has begun to move again, but not in sync with me. It performs my routine. Counting fares, printing tickets, making change. While I stand paralyzed, watching it operate the booth I can no longer leave. I understand now what he meant. The fare comes due, not for the journey, for the endless shift, the repetition, the comfortable prison of routine. I've been here longer than I remember, perhaps longer than is possible. And the coins are proof. Tokens from a station that existed before this one, operated by someone who made the same choice I did. Some debts can't be paid with money. They require something more permanent. The clock still reads 2:17 a.m. My reflection just sold a ticket to someone I can't see. And somewhere in the distance I hear the echo of footsteps approaching. Steady, patient, inevitable, as the next shift begins its endless loop. The booth never closes, the operator never leaves, and time, I've learned, is the only currency that truly matters. Story 2. Closed for maintenance. The receipt was still warm when I picked it up. The ink fresh and printed at the top in perfect mechanical type was a name I'd seen only once before. On the memorial plaque downstairs. Catherine Vale, 1972-1998. My name is Aaron Whitlock, and I've been working Booth 7 at Millbrook Junction for 3 years. Booth 6, directly to my left, has been sealed since before I was hired. According to the operations manual, it's been closed for indefinite structural renovation since 1999. The door is bolted, the window covered with frosted vinyl, and a yellowed "closed for maintenance" sign hangs permanently in the frame. Nobody talks about why it was closed. When I asked during orientation, my supervisor just said, "Some booths don't reopen," and moved on to explaining the fare card system. I never thought much about it. Transit systems are full of abandoned infrastructure. Platforms that never see passengers, tunnels rerouted decades ago, equipment gathering dust in storage rooms. Booth 6 was just another artifact of bureaucratic inertia, easier to seal than to renovate. My booth shared a thin partition wall with it, but I never heard anything from the other side. Just silence, stillness, the dead weight of an unused space. Until 3 months ago. It was a Thursday night, just past 11 p.m. The rush had thinned to its usual trickle. A few stragglers, maintenance crews heading down to the tunnels, the occasional lost tourist trying to make sense of the route maps. I was processing a fare refund when the overhead lights in Booth 6 flickered on. I froze, fingers hovering over the keyboard. The frosted window glowed softly, backlit by the fluorescent tubes that shouldn't have power. I stared at it for a full 30 seconds, waiting for the lights to cut out, assuming some electrical fault had briefly energized the old wiring. But they stayed on, steady and bright, casting a pale rectangle of light across the concourse floor. I leaned close to the partition wall and knocked twice. No response. I called the maintenance line, reported the anomaly. They said they'd send someone to check the breaker, but the lights went dark again before anyone arrived. The electrician who eventually showed up tested the booth circuit, completely dead, no power flow whatsoever. He shrugged and marked it as a faulty sensor, though we both knew that didn't explain how lights on a dead circuit had turned on. The second time I saw the silhouette. It was a week later, same time of night. The lights in Booth 6 flickered on without warning, and through the frosted glass I could make out a vague shape. Someone sitting at the counter, shoulders hunched slightly, head inclined as though reading something. My heart kicked hard against my ribs. I stood up, pressing my face close to the partition, trying to see more clearly. The figure didn't move, didn't react to my presence. I pounded on the wall. "Hey, who's in there?" The lights went out instantly, plunging Booth 6 back into darkness. The silhouette vanished as though it had never existed. I grabbed my flashlight, left my booth, and tried the sealed door. Still bolted, still locked. The dust on the handle was undisturbed, thick enough to show that nobody had touched it in years. Security reviewed the footage. The cameras showed Booth 6's window glowing briefly, but the angle wasn't clear enough to confirm whether anyone was inside. "Probably just reflections," the guard said, but his tone lacked conviction. He forwarded the clip to management. They never responded. The receipts started appearing 2 weeks ago. I came in for my shift and found a slip of paper on my counter, half tucked under the fare drawer. It was a transit receipt, printed on the old thermal paper we stopped using 5 years ago. The formatting was outdated. Passenger name, route, time, fare amount, all logged in a style the current system doesn't support. But it was the signature line that made my hands shake. Catherine Vale, booth operator, Millbrook Junction. I knew that name. There's a small memorial plaque in the station's lower concourse, installed in 2000. Catherine Vale, 1972-1998. Beloved colleague, she'd been the operator in booth 6. The plaque didn't say how she died, just that she was remembered fondly by staff and passengers alike. The receipt was dated yesterday, time-stamped 11:47 p.m. I was working yesterday. I didn't print this. More receipts followed. Every few nights another slip would appear, sliding under the partition from booth 6, emerging silently while I was distracted with a transaction or looking away. Always printed in the old format. Always signed by Catherine Vale. Always time-stamped to within minutes of when I found them. The passenger names were unfamiliar, the routes listed were current, but the physical paper was wrong. Faded slightly, edges softened as though they'd been handled many times despite appearing only moments before. I kept them in a folder, unsure what else to do. Reporting it felt absurd. Throwing them away felt disrespectful, though I couldn't say why. Instead, I started watching booth 6 more closely, waiting for the lights to flicker on, for the silhouette to reappear. Last night, both happened simultaneously. The lights came on at 11:52 p.m., and the figure was there. Clearer this time, more defined. I could see the outline of her uniform, the way her hands moved over the counter as though processing transactions. I didn't knock. I didn't call out. I just watched, transfixed as she worked through a routine I knew intimately. Performing tasks only another booth operator would recognize. Printing tickets, counting change, checking schedules. Then her head turned toward the partition, toward me. I couldn't see her face through the frosted glass, but I felt her attention, sharp and focused. She raised one hand and pressed it flat against the window, fingers splayed. I mirrored the gesture instinctively, placing my palm against my side of the partition. The wall between us felt warm, almost vibrating, and for a brief, disorienting moment I swore I could feel her fingers pressing back. A receipt slid under the partition, fresh and warm. I picked it up with trembling hands. The passenger name was mine, Aaron Whitlock. Route, Millbrook Junction to end of line. Time, 11:57 p.m. Fare paid in full. Operator signature, Catherine Vale. The lights in booth 6 went dark. I looked at the receipt, at my name printed in faded thermal ink, and felt a cold certainty settle into my chest. She wasn't haunting the booth. She was still working her shift, still selling tickets to passengers only she could see. And somehow I'd been added to her manifest. I don't know what end of line means when the operator has been dead for 26 years. I don't know if I'll see her again or if the receipts will keep coming, adding my name over and over to a passenger list that exists somewhere between memory and impossibility. But I've started noticing something else. When I close my eyes, I can hear it. The faint mechanical rhythm of a ticket printer running in booth 6, the soft rustle of paper being torn, the quiet murmur of a voice reciting routes and fares to an audience I cannot see. Some booths don't reopen because they never really closed, and some operators never finish their shift. They just keep working, long after the station forgets they were ever there. I have a receipt with my name on it now. I think Catherine is waiting for me to collect my ticket. Story 3. Lost and Found Frequencies. The intercom crackled to life at 3:14 a.m., and a voice asked for the next train to Greystone Terminal, a station that was demolished in 1974. And when I responded to explain, the voice that answered sounded exactly like mine. My name is Trevor Bassett, and I've operated the night booth at Harmon Street Station for 6 years. The intercom system here is a relic from the 1960s. Bulky, analog, prone to feedback loops and strange acoustic distortions. We've submitted dozens of work orders to replace it, but the budget never materializes, so we make do with duct tape fixes and the occasional percussive reset when the static becomes unbearable. It's part of the station's charm in a way. The hiss and crackle of a system that predates digital precision, where every call feels slightly haunted by decades of accumulated electromagnetic noise. Passengers use the intercom to ask directions, report emergencies, or complain about service delays. Most calls are straightforward, mundane. A mother asking which platform for the airport line. A confused tourist needing help with the fare card machine. Occasionally, someone drunk or belligerent shouting into the speaker before wandering off. I respond with scripted courtesy, guiding them through their questions, and then the line goes dead until the next call. The first anomaly occurred on a Tuesday in early October. I was reconciling the night's fare reports when the intercom clicked on, accompanied by its usual burst of static. A woman's voice, calm and polite, emerged from the noise. "Excuse me, operator. Could you tell me the next departure time for the Blue Line to Greystone Terminal?" I frowned. "Ma'am, there's no station called Greystone Terminal on the Blue Line. Are you looking for Greymont Station? That's on the Red Line." A pause. More static. Then her voice again, slightly distorted as though transmitted through layers of interference. "No. Greystone Terminal. Platform 9. The schedule board says next train at 3:30 a.m. "There's no Platform 9 at this station," I said carefully. "We only have platforms 1 through 6, and the Blue Line doesn't run to any station by that name." The static swelled, then cut abruptly. The line went dead. I checked the station cameras, scanning the concourse for anyone using the intercom stations. All were empty. I checked the call log on my terminal. No record of the incoming transmission. I assumed it was a wrong frequency, some interference from a maintenance radio or a nearby taxi dispatch, and returned to my paperwork. But I couldn't shake the name. Greystone Terminal. It nagged at me, familiar in a way I couldn't place. During my break, I dug through the station's archival storage. Boxes of old maps, decommissioned schedules, incident reports from decades past. I found it in a 1972 route map. Greystone Terminal, Blue Line, Platform 9. The station had been shuttered in 1973 due to structural instability and demolished the following year. It hadn't existed in over 50 years. The second call came 3 nights later, same time. 3:14 a.m., like clockwork. This time a man's voice, older with a faint accent I couldn't identify. "Operator, I need to confirm the weekend schedule for the Red Line to Porter's Crossing. My transfer isn't listed on the board." "Porter's Crossing?" I repeated, already feeling the cold weight of recognition. I knew that name too, though I couldn't say why. "Yes, sir, the 4:10 a.m. train. It's always on time, but the board's been broken all week." I pulled up the current route map on my terminal. No Porter's Crossing. I checked the historical archives again. Porter's Crossing, Red Line, discontinued service 1981, station raised 1985, 44 years gone. "Sir," I said slowly, "that station doesn't operate anymore. It was closed decades ago. Where are you calling from?" Static. A long, hollow hiss. Then his voice fainter now, as though receding into distance. "Platform 3, the signs say Porter's Crossing. The train's late." "Platform 3 is right outside my booth," I said, standing up to look through the glass. The platform was empty, bathed in harsh fluorescent light. No passengers, no trains. "I can see the tunnel," the man's voice continued, crackling with interference. "The lights are on. I think the train's coming." "Sir, there's no train scheduled for Platform 3 at this hour. You need to..." The line died. This time I didn't dismiss it. I contacted the security office, requested a full review of the intercom system and the camera feeds. They found nothing. No malfunctions, no unauthorized access, no passengers on Platform 3 at the time of the call. The head of security suggested I was tired, hearing things, stress-induced auditory hallucinations. He recommended a few days off. I didn't take them. Instead, I started logging the calls. They came every few nights, always between 3 a.m. and 4 a.m., always inquiring about stations that no longer existed. The voices varied: men, women, teenagers, elderly passengers, but they all shared the same calm confusion, as though they were standing in stations they believed were still operational, staring at schedule boards that hadn't displayed information in decades. I tried engaging them, asking questions. What year is it? What date is today? Can you describe where you are? But the responses were always fragmentary, distorted by layers of static that seemed to deepen with each call, as though the distance between us was growing. They mentioned train lines we discontinued, ticket prices that hadn't been accurate since the 1970s, transfer stations demolished before I was born. I began to recognize a pattern. Each station they named had been part of the transit system's original network, built in the early 1900s and gradually phased out as the city expanded. They were ghost stations, entombed beneath new infrastructure or erased entirely by urban renewal projects, and somehow passengers were still calling from them, still waiting for trains that would never arrive. The worst call came 2 weeks ago. The intercom clicked on at 3:14 a.m., and I heard breathing, slow, steady, deliberate. Then a voice, and my blood turned to ice. It was my voice, not similar, not an impersonation, identical down to the cadence, the slight rasp I get when I'm tired. I was hearing myself speak, but I wasn't speaking. "This is Operator Bassett at Harmon Street Station," my voice said through the intercom. "Can you confirm your current location?" I stared at the speaker, paralyzed. My lips weren't moving, my throat was closed, but my voice continued calm and procedural. "Please respond. This is a system check. Confirm your location and shift time." I forced myself to answer, my real voice trembling. "This is Trevor Bassett. I'm in booth 2, Harmon Street. What the hell is this?" Static. A long, hollow silence. Then my voice again, quieter now, tinged with something that might have been confusion or fear. "Booth 2, Harmon Street, shift began at 10:01 p.m., ends at 6:00 a.m. Is that still accurate?" "Yes," I whispered, "and that's accurate." "Good," my voice said. "I just wanted to make sure." The calls have been strange lately. Passengers asking about stations that don't exist anymore. Routes that were discontinued. It's disorienting. My hands were shaking. "Who are you?" "I'm you," the voice replied, matter of fact. "Or I was. I'm not sure anymore. The shifts blur together after a while. Time gets unstable. You'll understand soon." "Understand what?" The static swelled, a roaring wave of noise that made the speaker rattle in its housing. When it receded, my voice was barely audible, almost lost in the hiss. "That the stations never really close, the passengers never really leave, and the operators. We keep working, long after we think the shift has ended. You'll see. You'll hear your own voice calling one night, asking for confirmation, trying to remember where you are." The line went dead. I haven't answered the intercom since. When it clicks on now, and it does every night at 3:14 a.m., I let it ring through, let the static fill the booth while I sit frozen at my counter. Sometimes I hear voices asking for directions to demolish stations. Sometimes I hear nothing but the hiss of dead air. And sometimes I hear myself asking questions I don't remember speaking aloud, reciting schedules for trains that haven't run in 50 years. I'm starting to wonder if I'm still in booth 2 or if I've slipped somewhere else. some frequency between the present and the past, where stations never close and operators never finish their shifts. The clock says it's 3:14 a.m., but I've been watching it for hours and the hands haven't moved. The intercom just clicked on again. I can hear breathing. I think it's mine. I think I'm calling for directions. Story 4. The uncollected ticket. The ticket lay on my counter, edges torn and faded as though it had passed through 1,000 hands, stamped in bold red ink with a single word that made my throat tighten. Used, and beneath it the scan location. Platform 0, 4:47 a.m. My name is Curtis McCall, and I've been working the overnight ticket booth at Westfield Junction for 4 years. It's methodical work. Passengers approach, state their destination, I process the transaction, print the ticket, hand it through the slot. The rhythm becomes automatic, almost meditative, and most interactions last less than 30 seconds. Faces blur together. Names are forgotten as soon as they're spoken. The only constant is the ticket printer, chattering out its thermal paper receipts in an endless mechanical loop. 3 weeks ago, I printed a ticket for a passenger who never collected it. It was a slow night, the kind where hours stretch thin and the station feels more like a mausoleum than a transit hub. Around 11:30 p.m., the printer activated on its own. Not unusual, sometimes the system queues transactions during network lag, and spat out a single ticket. I glanced at it reflexively. One-way fare, Westfield Junction to Carlisle Station, departure 11:45 p.m. Standard transaction, except I hadn't processed it. No passenger had approached. No credit card terminal had beeped. No cash had exchanged hands. I picked up the ticket, frowning. The system log showed the transaction as completed, payment received, but there was no customer ID attached. I scanned the concourse through the booth's window. Empty except for a janitor mopping near the vending machines. I set the ticket aside, assuming it was a system glitch, a phantom entry generated by some database error that would correct itself overnight. At 11:45 p.m., I heard footsteps approaching. I looked up, expecting to see someone claiming the ticket. The footsteps grew louder, closer, the distinct rhythm of dress shoes on tile. But no one appeared at my window. The footsteps stopped directly in front of the booth, and I stared at the empty space where a passenger should have been standing. "Hello?" I called out. No response. The footsteps resumed, receding toward platform 4, fading into silence. I checked the ticket again. Still there, still valid, still unclaimed. I slipped it into the lost and found drawer and made a note in the logbook. Unclaimed ticket, 11:30 p.m. Possible system error. When I returned for my shift the next night, the ticket was gone from the drawer. I assumed a supervisor had discarded it during the day shift. But at 2:00 a.m., while processing a fare for an elderly passenger, I noticed something on the corner of my counter. A ticket, half tucked beneath the fare card reader. I picked it up and felt my stomach drop. It was the same ticket, same route, same departure time, same thermal paper. Except now it was visibly aged, edges frayed and slightly torn, the print faded as though exposed to sunlight for weeks. And stamped across the center in bold red ink, used. I turned it over. On the back in small, precise type was a scan log, platform 0, 4:47 a.m. There is no platform 0 at Westfield Junction. We have platforms 1 through 8, clearly marked, regularly maintained. I checked the station schematics, the maintenance blueprints, even the historical records. No platform 0. The designation didn't exist in any official documentation. I logged into the transaction database and searched for the ticket's ID number. The system returned an error. Record not found. I tried the scan log. Another error, invalid platform designation. It was as though the ticket existed in physical form but had been erased from every digital record. I should have thrown it away, should have dismissed it as an elaborate prank or a printing malfunction. Instead, I kept it, slipping it into my jacket pocket where it remained throughout my shift. It felt heavier than it should, the paper slightly warm as though it retained some residual heat from handling. The next night I found another ticket. This one appeared in the same place, same condition. Aged, torn, stamped used, scan location platform 0. But the departure time was different. 1:15 a.m. I checked the previous night's schedule. I'd been on shift at 1:15 a.m. No passenger had approached, no transaction had occurred. The tickets kept coming. Every shift, another would appear, each one bearing a different departure time, but always stamped with platform 0 and marked as used. The pile grew in my pocket, a wad of deteriorating paper that seemed to multiply faster than I could account for. I started cross-referencing the departure times with my logbook, looking for patterns. Every timestamp corresponded to a moment when I'd been alone in the booth, no passengers present, no transactions pending. Then I started noticing the footsteps, always the same. The sharp, deliberate click of dress shoes on tile approaching the booth, stopping, then receding toward the platforms. I'd look up each time, see no one, and moments later find another ticket waiting on my counter. The footsteps became so frequent that I stopped reacting, simply reaching for the ticket I knew would be there, adding it to the collection in my pocket. Last week I decided to investigate. At 4:30 a.m., when the station was completely deserted, I left the booth and walked the length of the concourse, checking every platform entrance. Platforms 1 through 8 were empty, the tracks silent. But at the far end of platform 8, partially concealed behind a maintenance access panel, I found something. A narrow corridor, unmarked and unlit, leading deeper into the station's infrastructure. I shouldn't have entered. Every instinct told me to turn back, to report it to security, to let someone else investigate. But the tickets in my pocket felt heavier with each passing second, and I needed to understand. The corridor descended at a gentle slope, the walls bare concrete, the air colder and staler than the main station. After 50 feet, it opened into a small platform, no wider than a subway car, no benches, no signage. Just a narrow strip of concrete facing a set of tracks that vanished into darkness in both directions. On the wall, stenciled in faded paint, Platform 0. I stood there, numb, staring at a place that shouldn't exist. The tracks looked old, the rails pitted with rust, but the platform itself was clean. No dust, no debris, as though it were regularly maintained despite being hidden from all official records. I heard a sound behind me, footsteps approaching from the corridor. I turned, heart hammering, and saw no one. The footsteps continued, passing me, moving onto the platform, stopping at the edge near the tracks. I heard the rustle of fabric, the faint intake of breath, the presence of someone standing inches away. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the stack of tickets. As I held them, the footsteps moved again, this time away from me, descending the platform as though stepping down to track level. I heard the scrape of shoes on gravel, then silence. I ran, fled back through the corridor, back to the booth where I locked the door and tried to steady my breathing. The tickets were still in my hand, and as I spread them on the counter, I realized something that made my vision blur. Every ticket bore my name, not as the operator, as the passenger. Curtis McCall, Westfield Junction to Carlisle Station, departure various times, scan location platform 0. I've been selling tickets to myself, or something has been using my name, my identity, to purchase one-way fares to a destination I don't remember authorizing. The timestamps correspond to moments I was alone, moments when time seemed to skip forward without explanation, moments I'd dismissed as exhaustion or distraction. The footsteps are outside the booth now. I can hear them pacing, circling, waiting. I think I'm supposed to collect my ticket. I think I've been leaving the booth at night, walking to platform 0 and returning without memory of the journey. The printer just activated. A new ticket is emerging, fresh and crisp. I don't want to look at it, but my hand is already reaching. Departure time, 6:11 a.m. The end of my shift. I think this time, I won't come back. Story 5. The Mirror Window. I was handing change through the slot when I caught the reflection in the glass, my face smiling back at me. Except my mouth was still neutral, and the reflection's smile was widening, impossibly slow. My name is Lillian Stokes, and I've worked booth 3 at Oak Ridge Station for 7 years. The booth is small, cramped, functional. A cube of metal and reinforced glass that separates me from the passengers who approach throughout the day. The glass divider is the only real barrier, a thick panel that allows face-to-face transactions while maintaining security. It's scratched and smudged from years of hands pressed against it, coins slid through the slot, faces leaning close to ask directions or complain about delays. Last December, the Transit Authority replaced the divider. The old glass had been damaged during a robbery attempt at another station, and in response they upgraded all booths with a new type of safety glass, mirrored on the operator's side, clear on the passenger's side. The idea was to reduce confrontation, to make it harder for passengers to read the operator's expressions, to create a psychological buffer. I didn't mind. The mirrored surface made the booth feel a bit more private, a bit more removed from the constant stream of faces and voices. I didn't notice the problem immediately. The reflection seemed normal at first. My face staring back when I glanced up, the usual movements mirrored perfectly. But after a few weeks, I started to feel uneasy around the glass. Nothing I could articulate. Just a vague sense of wrongness, like standing too close to a stranger on a crowded train. The reflection felt attentive, more present than it should be. The first time I noticed a delay, I thought I was imagining it. I'd raised my hand to adjust my hair, and in the glass, the reflection's hand moved a fraction of a second later, as though it were copying me rather than mirroring simultaneously. I blinked, tested it again, raised my hand, lowered it. The reflection matched perfectly. I told myself it was fatigue, the optical illusion of staring at my own face for too long. But the delays became more frequent. Not always, not predictably, but enough that I started avoiding direct eye contact with the glass. I'd look down when processing transactions, focus on the computer screen, keep my gaze anywhere except the mirrored surface. It helped, briefly. But the unease grew stronger. Then it smiled at me. It was a Tuesday morning, slow and quiet. A passenger approached, a middle-aged man in a business suit asking for a weekly pass. I processed the transaction mechanically, swiping his card, printing the receipt, sliding it through the gap. As I handed him his pass, I glanced up at the glass nose and saw my reflection smiling. I wasn't smiling. My face was neutral, professional. The same expression I wore for every transaction. But the reflection's mouth was curved upward, lips parted slightly, eyes crinkled at the corners. The smile was subtle, almost friendly, but it was there, unmistakably there. I looked away immediately, heart pounding. The passenger took his pass and walked away without noticing anything wrong. I sat frozen, hands trembling, afraid to look at the glass again. When I finally forced myself to glance up, the reflection was normal. My face unsmiling, matching my actual expression. I reported it to my supervisor, tried to explain what I'd seen. She listened politely, then suggested the glass might be distorting images due to the curvature or thickness. Mirrored glass can create optical illusions, she said, especially under fluorescent lighting. If it keeps bothering you, we can have maintenance take a look. I didn't push further. How could I? My reflection smiled at me, sounded absurd even to my own ears. Instead, I developed strategies to minimize my exposure to the glass. I angled my chair to face the computer screen more directly, used peripheral vision to handle transactions, kept my gaze down whenever possible. It worked, mostly. Days passed without incident, but the reflection was waiting. It started with small discrepancies. I'd glance up briefly and see my reflection's head tilted at a slightly different angle than mine. Or I'd reach for the coin drawer and notice the reflection's hand hovering over a different section of the counter. The differences were subtle, fleeting, gone the moment I looked directly at them. But they accumulated, a steady erosion of the certainty that the reflection was truly mine. Then it began anticipating my movements. I'd think about reaching for a ticket, and the reflection's hand would move first, hovering over the printer before my physical hand followed. I'd consider looking left, and the reflection's eyes would already be turned in that direction, waiting for me to catch up. It was as though the reflection had become slightly ahead of me in time, mirroring not what I was doing, but what I was about to do. The passengers noticed nothing. Why would they? From their side of the glass, it was clear, non-mirrored, showing my real face, my real movements. Only I could see the reflection, and only I could see how it was starting to diverge. The worst moment came last week. It was late evening, nearing the end of my shift. An elderly woman approached, struggling with a fare card that wouldn't scan. I leaned forward to help, guiding her through the process, and as I did, I caught the reflection in the glass. It wasn't helping her. It was staring at me. While my real body leaned forward, hands reaching toward the card reader, the reflection sat upright, hands folded on the counter, eyes locked onto mine with an intensity that made my skin crawl. It didn't blink, didn't move, just stared, watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Curiosity, perhaps, or something darker. I finished helping the woman, handed her the validated card, and waited until she walked away before looking back at the glass. The reflection was normal again, matching my posture perfectly. But I knew what I'd seen. The reflection wasn't mirroring anymore, it was observing. I've started documenting the discrepancies. Every time I notice a delay, an anticipation, a deviation, I log it in a notebook I keep hidden in my desk drawer. The entries are brief, clinical. 10:47 a.m. Reflection smiled before I did. Duration approx 3 seconds. 2:15 p.m. Reflection's eyes moved left while mine were straight ahead. 5:30 p.m. Reflection's lips moving as though speaking, no sound, no corresponding action on my part. The logs are becoming more frequent. The reflection is becoming bolder. 2 days ago, I saw it mouth something. I was processing a rush of passengers, barely looking up, when I caught movement in the glass. The reflection's lips were forming words, slow and deliberate, though I wasn't speaking. I couldn't make out what it was saying. The movement was too distorted, too alien. But the intention was clear. It was trying to communicate. I don't look at the glass anymore. I keep my eyes fixed downward no matter how many passengers complain that I seem distracted or rude. I can feel the reflection watching, waiting for me to glance up, to make eye contact, to acknowledge it fully. Sometimes I hear a faint tapping on the glass, rhythmic and patient, like someone knocking to get my attention. Last night, during the final hour of my shift, the tapping grew louder. I kept my eyes down, hands shaking as I processed the last few transactions. The tapping became insistent, urgent, and then I heard something else. A whisper, faint and distorted, as though traveling through layers of glass and time. It was my voice. The reflection was speaking with my voice, calling my name softly, repeatedly. trying to draw my gaze upward. I didn't look. I finished my shift, locked the booth, and walked away without glancing back. But I could feel it watching me, the reflection standing at the glass, waiting. I've requested a transfer to a different booth. The request was denied. Staff shortages, operational needs, the usual bureaucratic obstacles. I'm scheduled to work tomorrow night, same booth, same mirrored glass. I don't know what happens if I look directly at it. I don't know what it wants or why it's diverging further from me each day. But I'm terrified that one morning I'll glance up and see my reflection doing something I'm not doing. Standing when I'm sitting, leaving when I'm staying, living a routine that no longer matches my own. And I'm even more terrified that one day the passengers will start seeing the difference too. That they'll approach the window and see two versions of me. One behind the glass, processing transactions, and one in the reflection, staring back with eyes that have stopped pretending to be mine. The booth is waiting. The reflection is waiting. And I have to go back. Story 6. Line 12. Discontinued. The printer roared to life at 11:47 p.m., spitting out page after page of passenger manifests for Line 12, a route that hadn't run in 16 years. And at the bottom of the final page, signed in perfect cursive, Margaret Hollis, booth operator, deceased 2009. My name is Vincent Collier, and I've been the night shift booth operator at Riverside Central for 9 years. I know every route, every schedule, every discontinued line in the system's century-long history. Line 12 is one of them, a northern route that ran through the old industrial district, servicing factories and warehouses that closed in the late 1990s. The line was officially discontinued in 2008 after a tunnel collapse near Bridgewater Junction. 3 passengers died in the incident. The city deemed the repair costs unjustifiable given the declining ridership, so they sealed the tunnels, rerouted the remaining service, and erased Line 12 from all active schedules. We don't sell tickets for Line 12. The route codes have been purged from the fare system. The platforms that serviced it are chained off, the entrance tunnels bricked over. For all practical purposes, Line 12 ceased to exist 16 years ago. So when my printer activated at 11:47 p.m. on a Thursday night and began spewing out a continuous stream of documents, I knew immediately something was catastrophically wrong. I watched, paralyzed, as page after page emerged, passenger manifests, each one listing names, ticket numbers, boarding times, destinations. All for Line 12, all dated today. All formatted in the old style we discontinued years ago before the system transitioned to digital records. The printer ran for 3 solid minutes, filling the output tray and spilling onto the floor. When it finally stopped, I picked up the first page with trembling hands. The header was clear. Line 12. Passenger manifest. Riverside Central to Bridgewater Junction, 12:15 a.m. departure. 53 passengers listed by name. I didn't recognize any of them. I flipped to the last page where the operator's signature was required for physical manifests. The signature was there. Written in elegant cursive, Margaret Hollis, booth operator. My blood turned cold. I knew that name. Everyone who'd worked in the system long enough knew that name. Margaret Hollis had been the senior night operator at Riverside Central for 23 years. She died in 2009, a heart attack during her shift, found slumped at her booth by the morning relief operator. There was a memorial plaque in the break room, a small bronze rectangle commemorating her decades of service. I checked the printer's system log, looking for the source of the transmission. The log showed no incoming data, no network activity. The pages had generated spontaneously, as though the printer had accessed some phantom database that no longer existed. I contacted the IT help desk, explained the situation as calmly as I could. They remoted into my terminal, ran diagnostics, found nothing unusual. Probably a corrupted cache file, the technician said. Old data fragments sometimes resurface during system updates. Just shred the printouts and log it as a glitch. I didn't shred them. I spread the manifests across my counter, reading through the names, the ticket numbers, the boarding times. Everything was formatted correctly, procedurally perfect, as though someone had meticulously prepared for a Line 12 departure that would never occur. Then I noticed the timestamps. The manifest listed a 12:15 a.m. departure, 28 minutes from now. I looked at the platform assignments. Platform 6, which had been sealed off for over a decade. I left the booth, walked down the concourse to Platform 6. The entrance was exactly as I remembered. Chain link barrier, no entry signs, the tunnel beyond dark and silent. I shone my flashlight through the gaps. The platform was empty, the tracks covered in dust and debris. No train, no passengers, no indication that anything had changed. I returned to the booth, unsettled but convinced it was a system anomaly, nothing more. I'd file a report in the morning, let the database administrators figure it out. At 12:14 a.m., the terminal in my booth flickered. The main screen went black for 3 seconds, then refreshed, displaying a new interface I didn't recognize. An older version of the scheduling software, the kind we'd phased out in 2007. At the top of the screen, bold and bright, Line 12 departure, Platform 6, 12:15 a.m. On time. My heart hammered against my ribs. I tried to close the window, but the interface wouldn't respond. I tried logging out. Nothing. The screen remained locked on the Line 12 schedule, updating in real time as the departure minute approached. At 12:15 a.m., I heard it. A distant rumble, deep and resonant, echoing from somewhere far beneath the station. The sound grew louder, more distinct, the unmistakable rhythm of a train moving through a tunnel. It was coming from the direction of Platform 6. I grabbed my flashlight and ran. The chain link barrier was still in place, the no entry signs unchanged. But beyond them, the platform lights were on. Old incandescent bulbs casting a yellow glow that hadn't existed moments before. And on the platform, standing in quiet clusters, were people. Passengers, dozens of them, dressed in clothing that seemed slightly out of date, waiting calmly for a train that shouldn't exist. I recognized none of them, but they stood with the relaxed posture of regular commuters, checking watches, adjusting bags, murmuring to one another in low voices. I shouted through the barrier, "Hey, you can't be here, this platform is closed." None of them reacted. They didn't turn, didn't acknowledge me, they simply waited, staring down the tunnel as the rumble grew deafening. A train emerged from the darkness, old rolling stock, the kind we'd retired in the early 2000s, windows glowing with interior light. It slowed to a smooth stop, doors hissing open. The passengers boarded methodically, filing into the cars without hesitation. Within 30 seconds, the platform was empty. The doors closed. The train pulled away, disappearing back into the tunnel. The platform lights went dark. I stood there, shaking, unable to process what I'd witnessed. When I returned to the booth, the terminal had reverted to its normal interface. The Line 12 schedule was gone. The manifests I'd left on the counter were still there, but when I picked them up, the paper felt different. Older, more brittle, as though they'd aged years in the span of minutes. I searched the staff database for Margaret Hollis, needing to confirm what I already knew. Her file came up immediately. Employed 1986-2009, deceased February 14, 2009. I scrolled through her shift records, archived and sealed. The final entry was dated February 13, 2009, her last completed shift before her death. Then I saw something that made my hands go numb. There was a pending shift record dated today, beginning at 12:00 a.m. The operator ID was Margaret Hollis. Status: active. I ran a personnel conflict check, looking for errors. The system flagged the duplicate ID and generated a replacement assignment. A new shift record appeared below Margaret's entry, scheduled to begin at 12 a.m. No end time listed. The assigned operator was me, Vincent Collier, replacement for Margaret Hollis. Line 12 service. I tried to delete the entry. The system wouldn't allow it. I tried logging out, restarting the terminal, contacting IT support. The entry remained locked and unchangeable, as though it had been embedded in the database by some authority beyond administrative override. I pulled up the current transit map, looking for line 12. It wasn't there. I checked the historical records, confirmed the discontinuation in 2008. But when I accessed the real-time scheduling system, the one that controllers use to track active trains, line 12 was listed marked operational, with trains running every 45 minutes through the night. I contacted the dispatch center, asked if they were tracking any line 12 trains. The dispatcher sounded confused. Line 12? That's been dead for over a decade. Why are you asking? It's showing as active in my system, I said. Full schedule, real-time updates. That's impossible. Run a diagnostic. You're probably looking at cached data. But I knew it wasn't cached data. I could hear the trains now, faint but unmistakable, rumbling beneath the station at regular intervals. I could feel the vibrations through the floor, the subtle tremor of heavy machinery moving through sealed tunnels that shouldn't contain anything but darkness and decay. At 1 a.m., the printer activated again. Another manifest, another list of 53 passengers. Different names this time, but the same route, Riverside Central to Bridgewater Junction. Departure 1:30 a.m., and at the bottom, signed in the same elegant cursive, Margaret Hollis, booth operator. I walked back to Platform 6. The barrier was still closed, but the platform beyond was lit again, passengers already gathering. They arrived silently, emerging from corridors I couldn't see, assembling with the same calm purpose. At 1:30 a.m., the train arrived, the passengers boarded, and the platform emptied. This happened every 45 minutes throughout the night. Manifests printed. Passengers appeared. Trains ran through tunnels that officially didn't exist, servicing a line the city had declared dead. By 4 a.m., I'd accumulated 11 manifests, all signed by Margaret Hollis. I compared the signatures to the memorial plaque photo in the break room, identical, down to the specific loops and slants. I searched for her personnel file again, this time digging deeper. I found shift notes she'd filed in 2008, just before the tunnel collapse. In her final report, dated 3 days before the incident, she'd written, "Passenger counts for line 12 have been inconsistent. System shows full manifests, but platforms are often empty. Request audit of scheduling software. Concerned about discrepancies." The report had been logged, never acted upon. A week later, the tunnel collapsed, line 12 was discontinued, and Margaret continued working her shifts for another year before her death. I think I understand now. Margaret never stopped working line 12. Even after the collapse, even after the line was officially closed, she kept processing passengers, kept signing manifests, kept running the schedule as though nothing had changed. And when she died, the system didn't replace her. It simply continued, running ghost trains through sealed tunnels, servicing passengers who existed in some liminal space between operational reality and bureaucratic erasure. And now, the system has decided I'm her replacement. My shift was supposed to end at 6 a.m., but when I checked the schedule, there was no end time listed. Just a continuous block marked Line 12 service, ongoing. I tried clocking out. The system wouldn't accept it. I tried leaving the booth. The door was locked from the outside, though I could see the concourse clearly through the glass. At 6 a.m., when the morning shift operator should have arrived, no one came. The station remained empty, frozen in the perpetual state of pre-dawn silence. The clock on my terminal reads 6 a.m., But it hasn't advanced. The hands are still, the seconds unmoving. The printer just activated again. Another manifest. Another list of names I don't recognize. Another train due in 15 minutes. I can hear them now. The passengers moving through the station, unseen but present. Their footsteps echoing in corridors that should be empty. They're heading toward Platform 6, waiting for the train that will carry them through tunnels that don't exist to destinations that were erased from every map. And I'm still here, signing manifests, processing fares for a line that was supposed to be dead. Margaret's signature is on today's reports, but when I look at my own handwriting, it's starting to change. The loops growing more elegant, the slant shifting, the style morphing into something that looks unsettlingly like hers. I think Lean 12 never really stopped running. I think some routes persist beyond the paperwork, beyond the demolition and the official discontinuation kept alive by operators who can't let go and passengers who refuse to acknowledge the closure. I think I'm becoming part of that persistence. The train is arriving. The passengers are boarding, and my shift, according to the system, has no end time. Just an ongoing service running through the dark forever. Story 7. Exact fare only. I dumped the coins onto the counter, counting them mechanically when I saw it, stamped faintly on the rim of the quarter, so small I almost missed it. VC, my initials in lettering I didn't recognize but somehow knew was mine. My name is Valerie Chen, and I've worked the evening booth at Parkside Station for 2 years. It's a quiet station, mostly residential traffic, predictable patterns. The same faces appear at the same times, commuters whose routines I've memorized without effort. There's a rhythm to it, a comforting monotony that makes the hours pass smoothly. He started coming 3 months ago, always at 7:33 p.m., exact. A man in his 40s, maybe 50s, wearing a gray coat and carrying a leather briefcase. He'd approach the booth, place exact change on the counter, $3.50 precisely, and say the same thing every time. 1 ticket southbound, keep the rest for the return. There was never any rest. He always paid the exact fare, but he repeated the phrase without fail, as though it were part of a script he'd memorized long ago. I didn't think much of it at first. Passengers have their quirks, their verbal tics. Some insist on receipts they'll never use. Others count their change 3 times before leaving. His habit was no stranger than anyone else's, but after 2 weeks I noticed something odd. I never saw him board a train. I'd sell him the ticket. He'd take it with a polite nod and walk toward the platforms. But when I glanced at the security monitors, one which cycle through all platform cameras, I never caught sight of him boarding. He'd simply vanish between the booth and the trains as though he evaporated into the station's infrastructure. I started watching more carefully. I'd sell him the ticket and immediately switch the monitor to the southbound platform. I'd see other passengers waiting, boarding, departing, but never him. I checked the northbound platform thinking I'd misheard his destination. Nothing. I even reviewed the archived footage during my breaks, scrubbing through hours of recordings. He appeared at my booth clear as day, but never at the platforms. A week ago, I decided to check the fare drawer after his visit. I counted the coins he'd given me. $2 coins, 1 50-cent piece, 10 dimes, standard denominations. But when I picked them up, they were warm, as though they'd been held in a closed fist for hours. I examined them more closely. Most were ordinary, worn from circulation. But one of the quarters caught my eye. On the rim, barely visible, were 2 letters stamped in fine, precise type. VC. My initials. I rotated the coin under the light, trying to convince myself it was a manufacturing defect, a coincidence. But the letters were too deliberate, too clean. I checked the other coins. Another quarter bore the same marking. then a dime. 5 of the 10 coins he'd given me had my initials stamped on them. I kept them separate from the rest of the drawer, slipping them into my pocket. That night, I took them home and examined them under a magnifying glass. The initials were hand-stamped, not machine-pressed, the kind of mark a jeweler or engraver might make. But I'd never had coins engraved. I'd never owned these specific coins before he handed them to me. The next night, he appeared at 7:33 p.m., exactly as always. I processed the transaction mechanically, watching his hands as he placed the coins on the counter. They were warm again, and when I counted them, 3 bore my initials. "Excuse me," I said before he could walk away. "Where did you get these?" He looked at me with an expression of mild confusion. "Get what?" "The coins. They have my initials on them." He glanced down at the counter, then back at me, his face blank. "I don't know what you mean. I just pay the fare. But keep the rest for the return," he said, cutting me off gently, and walked toward the platforms. I switched the monitor to the southbound platform, empty except for a custodian sweeping the far end. No sign of the man. I checked northbound. Nothing. I checked the main concourse. He was gone. I ran the transaction history, looking for his ticket ID. The system showed the sale, the amount, the timestamp. But the ticket ID field was blank, as though the transaction had been processed without generating an actual ticket. I contacted security, asked them to review tonight's footage. They pulled up the recording. I appeared clearly on screen, reaching through the slot to take the coins, but the space in front of the booth was empty. No man, no briefcase. Just me, interacting with nothing. "Camera glitch," the security officer said. "Happens sometimes with the angle and the lighting." But I'd seen him, spoken to him, held the coins he'd given me, coins that were still warm in my pocket. Last night I decided to confront him directly. When he appeared at 7:33 p.m., I didn't process the transaction. I just asked, "Who are you?" He tilted his head slightly as though the question surprised him. "I'm a passenger." "Where are you going?" "Southbound. End of the line." "And the return?" He paused, and for the first time his expression changed. Something uncertain flickering across his face. "I don't know. I've been waiting for the return for a long time." "How long?" "I don't remember." He placed the coins on the counter, the same exact amount, and walked away. I didn't try to stop him. I just watched as he disappeared into the station, and once again the cameras showed nothing. I counted the coins. 8 of the 10 bore my initials now. I think I understand. He's paying for a return trip he never completed, a journey that was interrupted or abandoned, and somehow the fare keeps circulating, passing through the system, accumulating markers of the operators who processed it. The initials aren't mine. They're everyone who's touched these coins, everyone who's been part of his endless loop. And now, I'm part of it too. The coins are in my pocket, warm and waiting. I can feel them against my leg, a weight that seems heavier than metal should be. I think when all the coins bear my initials, when the set is complete, I'll understand what the return means. I think I'll be the one who boards the train that never arrives. He's due in 7 minutes. I can hear footsteps approaching, steady and inevitable, and I know when I look up, he'll be there, briefcase in hand, exact change ready. And I'll take it because that's what operators do. We process the fare no matter where it's going. Story 8. The Night Audit. I stared at the audit report, hands trembling as the final entry materialized on screen. Date: tomorrow, 11:47 p.m. Transaction type: final settlement. Operator Ethan Wallace. Status: account closed. My name is Ethan Wallace, and I've been the night auditor at Central Junction Station for 8 years. My job is procedural, almost meditative. At the end of each shift, I reconcile all ticket sales, fare card transactions, and revenue entries, ensuring the digital records match the physical cash counts. It's tedious work, but it has a satisfying completeness. Numbers that must balance, discrepancies that must be explained, a system that demands precision. The audit software is old, legacy code from the early 2000s, but it's stable and reliable. Every night I log in, pull the day's transaction reports, cross-reference them with the booth logs, and submit the final reconciliation. The system processes the data, archives it, and resets for the next day. Clean, orderly, predictable. 4 weeks ago, the reports started changing. I'd run the audit as usual, reviewed the entries, verified the totals. But when I returned to the screen after a brief break, the data had shifted. New entries appeared that I hadn't seen before. Transactions time-stamped in the future, sometimes hours ahead, sometimes days. I thought it was a display bug, some glitch in the date sorting. I refreshed the page. The future entries remained, interspersed with the current day's data. I logged out, restarted the system, ran the audit again. The same future entries appeared, always slightly different, always incrementing forward in time. I contacted IT support, explained the anomaly. They remoted in, reviewed the database, found nothing unusual. Probably a time zone configuration error, the technician said. I'll submit a ticket to the database team. The ticket was never resolved. The future entries kept appearing. At first, they were mundane. Standard ticket sales, fare card reloads, amounts that seemed reasonable. But the timestamps were impossible. I'd see transactions dated 3 days from now, a week from now, sometimes a full month ahead. I started documenting them, comparing the predicted transactions to what actually occurred when those dates arrived. They were accurate, perfectly, disturbingly accurate. A future entry would list a $50 fare card reload at 3:42 p.m. on a specific date. When that date arrived, a passenger would approach the booth at exactly 3:42 p.m. and reload a fare card with $50. The match was precise, down to the amount and the minute. I tested it repeatedly, watching the future entries populate, then waiting for the dates to arrive and confirming the transactions occurred exactly as predicted. The audit system was somehow accessing data that hadn't been generated yet, pulling records from a version of the database that existed forward in time. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe the system was extrapolating patterns, predicting transactions based on historical trends. But the accuracy was too specific, too granular. It wasn't prediction. It was reporting actual events that hadn't happened yet. 2 weeks ago, I noticed my name appearing in the future entries, not as the auditor, as a transaction participant. The entries listed me as purchasing tickets, reloading fare cards, making payments I hadn't authorized. The amounts were small at first, a few dollars here and there, scattered across dates weeks in advance. I ignored them, assuming they were database errors, artifacts of whatever corruption was causing the temporal anomaly. But the entries grew more frequent, more substantial. Last week, I saw an entry dated 10 days from now. A $1,000 fare card reload, transaction originating from my employee ID, time-stamped at 11:52 p.m. I don't have $1,000 to load onto a fare card. I've never made a transaction that large. And I'd never conduct a personal transaction during my audit shift. It violates protocol. I tried to delete the entry. The system wouldn't allow it. I tried flagging it as fraudulent. The flag was rejected, transaction verified, as awaiting execution. The future entries continued to populate, and my name appeared with increasing frequency. Purchases I hadn't made, fare cards I hadn't loaded, routes I hadn't traveled. Each entry was time-stamped with precision, counting down toward dates that were rapidly approaching. 3 days ago, I saw the final entry. It appeared at the bottom of tomorrow night's audit report, isolated from the other transactions, marked with a red flag I'd never seen before. The entry was simple, stark. Date, tomorrow, 11:47 p.m. Transaction. Type, final settlement operator Ethan Wallace. Amount 0.00, status, account closed. I stared at it, numb. Account closed wasn't a standard transaction type. It didn't correspond to any operation in the FAIR system. I searched the audit software's documentation, looking for an explanation. Nothing. The term didn't exist in any official record. I called IT support again, more insistent this time. They reviewed the entry remotely, confirmed it was present in the database, but couldn't explain its origin. It's not formatted like a normal transaction, the technician said. It looks like a manually inserted record, but the timestamp is in the future, which shouldn't be possible. What does account closed mean? I asked. I don't know. It's not a term we use. Maybe it's a legacy code from the old system? But I knew it wasn't legacy code. The entry felt intentional, final, like a conclusion written before the story had finished. I've been running audits obsessively since then, checking the future entries multiple times per shift, looking for changes or updates. The earlier predictions remain accurate. Passengers arrive, transactions occur. The data aligns perfectly. But the final entry doesn't change. It remains fixed, immutable, counting down. Tomorrow night, 11:47 p.m., account closed. I tried taking tomorrow night off, submitted a leave request to avoid being present when the timestamp arrives. The request was denied. Insufficient staffing, operational requirements, the usual excuses. I considered calling in sick, simply not showing up. But something compels me to see it through. To be present when the entry executes, to understand what final settlement means. I've started reviewing my own transaction history, searching for patterns or clues. The entries with my name show a progression. Small transactions escalating to larger ones, culminating in the $1,000 reload scheduled for later tonight. I don't know how or why I'm supposed to make that transaction. I don't intend to. But the system insists it will happen. At 11:52 p.m., the fare card terminal in my booth activated on its own. I watched, paralyzed, as the screen displayed a reload prompt. Amount $1,000, confirm transaction? I didn't touch the terminal. I didn't authorize anything. But the system processed the transaction automatically, deducting the amount from an account I didn't recognize, crediting it to a fare card I'd never issued. The receipt printer chattered, spitting out a confirmation slip. I picked it up with shaking hands. The receipt showed my employee ID, the timestamp, 11:52 p.m., and the amount, $1,000. At the bottom, in small print, account balance remaining $0. I checked my bank account on my phone. Unchanged. I checked my employee payroll. Normal. The $1,000 hadn't come from any account I controlled. It had been generated from nothing, a phantom transaction that existed only within the FAIR system's database. I ran tonight's audit. The $1,000 entry was there, marked complete, exactly as the future report had predicted weeks ago. And below it, the final entry remained, now less than 24 hours away. Final settlement, tomorrow, 11:47 p.m., account closed. I think I understand now. The audit system isn't just reconciling transaction, it's reconciling people, tracking our presence within the station's infrastructure, logging our interactions until the account reaches a natural conclusion. Every passenger, every operator, everyone who passes through the system is assigned an account, and eventually every account closes. I've been processing my own closure, watching it approach one transaction at a time, each entry bringing me closer to the final audit. Tomorrow night I'll be here. I'll run the reports, reconcile the data, and at 11:47 p.m., the system will execute the final entry. I don't know what happens when an operator's account closes. I don't know if it's metaphorical or literal, symbolic or physical. But the audit demands completion. The numbers must balance. And somewhere in the database, a record exists that says my time in this booth ends tomorrow, with a final transaction that costs nothing and settles everything. The system is always accurate. The predictions always come true. And I've learned not to question the audit. Story 9, Counter 6. I pressed the intercom button and said, "Booth 3, how can I help you?" And 7 seconds later, my own voice echoed back through the speaker, asking the exact same question. "My name is Dale Pritchard, and I work Booth 3 at East Line Terminal. Booth 6, directly across the concourse from mine, has been sealed for 3 years. They won't tell us exactly what happened, just that there was an incident involving the previous operator and the decision was made to close the counter permanently rather than reassign staff. The intercom panel above it was disconnected, the booth door was locked, and a tarp was draped over the window. It became part of the station's landscape, another piece of forgotten infrastructure. Except the intercom light still blinks sometimes. It's faint, easy to miss unless you're looking directly at it, but I've noticed it over the past few weeks. A small amber LED above Booth 6's sealed panel, flickering in rhythm with my own intercom activity. When a passenger calls my booth, my light blinks, and simultaneously the light above Booth 6 blinks too, perfectly synchronized. I reported it to maintenance. They tested the circuit, confirmed that Booth 6's intercom panel was physically disconnected from the power supply. No current, no signal, no reason for the light to function. "Residual charge," the electrician suggested, though his tone indicated he didn't believe it himself. He replaced the panel entirely. The new panel had no light installed, just blank plastic. The next night, the light was back. Same amber glow, same synchronization. I started testing it deliberately. I'd press my intercom button and the light above Booth 6 would blink simultaneously. I'd release the button and both lights would go dark together. It was as though the booths were still connected, linked by some circuit that existed beyond the physical wiring. Then I started hearing the voice. It was late, nearly 2 a.m., when a passenger used the intercom to ask for directions. I answered, gave the information, and ended the call. As I released the button, I heard something through the speaker. Faint, distorted but unmistakably my own voice, repeating the same directions I'd just given. I thought it was feedback, an audio loop caused by faulty wiring. But the repetition wasn't immediate. It was delayed by exactly 7 seconds. I'd speak, release the button, and 7 seconds later my voice would echo back through the intercom saying the same words. I tested it again. "This is Booth 3 testing the intercom." I released the button, counted slowly. 7 seconds later, my voice emerged from the speaker. "This is Booth 3 testing the intercom." The echo was perfect, not a distortion or a recording. My exact voice, my exact intonation, delayed by a precise interval. I contacted the control center, asked if they were experiencing any intercom malfunctions. They ran a diagnostic remotely, found no issues. "Your signal is clean," the dispatcher said. "No feedback, no crosstalk. Whatever you're hearing isn't coming from the network." But I kept hearing it. Every time I used the intercom, the 7-second delay followed, my voice returning to me like a message from the recent past. I started wondering if the signal was originating from Booth 6. If somehow, despite being sealed and disconnected, the booth was still active, still processing intercom calls with a 7-second delay. I decided to test the theory. One night I left my booth, crossed the concourse, and stood in front of Booth 6. The tarp was still in place, the door still locked. I pressed my ear against the window, listening. Silence. No hum of electronics, no ambient noise. Just the dead stillness of an unused space. I returned to my booth and pressed the intercom button. If anyone is in booth 6, please respond. 7 seconds later, my voice echoed back. If anyone is in booth 6, please respond. I tried again, more specific. This is Dale Pritchard. If you can hear me, identify yourself. 7 seconds. This is Dale Pritchard. If you can hear me, identify yourself. It was my voice, my name, my request. But I hadn't been in booth 6. I hadn't spoken those words from that location. The delay suggested the signal was being routed through booth 6, processed and returned, but the booth itself was empty. I started experimenting with the delay. I'd speak a sentence, wait 7 seconds, then speak again immediately after the echo finished. The result was disorienting. A conversation with myself, one side delayed just enough that it felt like dialogue with a stranger. What do you want? I'd ask. 7 seconds later, my voice, what do you want? Then I'd respond immediately, I don't know. 7 seconds later, my voice, I don't know. It created a strange, recursive loop, my questions and answers blending into a distorted conversation that made less sense the longer it continued. Last week I tried something different. I spoke a question, then remained silent, waiting to see if the echo would add anything, if there was any deviation from the original words. Why is booth 6 still responding? 7 seconds passed. My voice returned. Why is booth 6 still responding? Then after a brief pause, an additional phrase I hadn't spoken. Because I never left. My heart stopped. I stared at the intercom panel, hands frozen. The voice was mine, but the words weren't. I pressed the button again, hands shaking. Who is this? 7 seconds. Who is this? Then, you know who this is. I didn't respond. I sat in silence, listening to the empty hiss of the intercom channel, waiting for something more. But the voice didn't continue. The connection went dead. I searched the personnel records, looking for information about the previous operator at booth 6. The file was sealed, marked Internal Review, Restricted Access. I contacted HR, requested clearance to view the file. My request was denied without explanation. I asked a co-worker, someone who'd been with the station longer than I had. He hesitated, then told me what he knew. The operator in booth 6 had worked alone for years, taking night shifts exclusively, rarely interacting with other staff. One night, dispatch lost contact with him mid-shift. Security found the booth empty, the door locked from the inside, the intercom still active but transmitting only static. The operator was never found. The booth was sealed shortly afterward, and the incident was buried in administrative paperwork. His name was Dale Pritchard. My name. I checked my employment file, looking for discrepancies, errors, anything that might explain the coincidence. The file was clean, accurate, unremarkable. But when I compared my start date to the incident report, I noticed something. I was hired exactly 1 week after booth 6 was sealed. I don't remember applying for the job. I don't remember the interview. I have the paperwork, the signed documents, the onboarding records, but the actual memory is absent, as though it happened to someone else. I pressed the intercom button one more time. Are you still there? 7 seconds. Are you still there? Then, I've always been here, and so have you. The light above booth 6 is blinking now in perfect sync with mine, and I can hear the intercom hum even when I'm not pressing the button. The voice continues, delayed by 7 seconds, asking questions I don't remember asking, giving answers I don't remember speaking. I think the delay isn't temporal, I think it's spatial. Booth 3 and booth 6 are the same place, separated by 7 seconds of existence, and somewhere in that gap, I've been split into 2 versions of the same operator, one answering calls, one echoing them. And soon, I think the delay will close. Story 10. The Emergency Key. I turned the key in the service panel behind my booth, expecting storage space, and instead found a corridor stretching into darkness, walls lined with ticket stubs dating back to 1962. And at the far end, impossibly, another version of my booth, occupied. My name is Russell Hayes, and I've been the overnight operator at Greenway Station for 6 years. Every booth operator is issued a master key, a universal access tool that opens service gates, utility panels, emergency exits, and personnel-only doors throughout the station. It's a simple brass key, stamped with the Transit Authority's seal, and it's been on my keyring since my first day. I've used it hundreds of times without incident. Gates, supply closets, electrical panel, all standard. The key works smoothly, reliably, without hesitation. But 2 weeks ago, I used it on a panel I'd never noticed before, and everything changed. The panel was behind my booth, set flush into the concrete wall, almost invisible unless you were looking for it. I'd seen it countless times, but always assumed it was decorative or structural, not functional. But during a routine inspection, I noticed the faint outline of a keyhole, nearly invisible in the dim lighting. I tried my master key. It slid in smoothly, turned without resistance. The panel swung open silently, revealing a corridor. I stood frozen, staring into the opening. The corridor was narrow, maybe 3 feet wide, stretching straight back into darkness. The walls were bare concrete, stained with moisture and age, and the air that wafted out was stale, heavy, as though it had been sealed for decades. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped inside. The corridor extended about 30 feet before opening into a small chamber. The walls were lined floor to ceiling with paper, thousands of ticket stubs, yellowed and brittle, pinned and pasted in overlapping layers. I moved closer, shining my light across the surface. The tickets were old, formatted in styles I recognized from historical archives. Dates from the 1960s, 70s, 80s, routes that no longer existed. Fare prices long obsolete. Some of the tickets were handwritten. The ink faded to ghostly traces. Others were printed in fonts I didn't recognize, mechanical and precise. A few bore stamps and seals from station operators whose names I'd never heard. I picked one at random, carefully peeling it from the wall. The paper was fragile, crumbling slightly at the edges. The ticket was dated August 14th, 1962. Route Greenway to Riverside. Operator signature M. Holloway. I searched my memory. I didn't know anyone named Holloway. I'd never seen that name in the station's personnel history. I moved deeper into the chamber, examining more tickets. The dates progressed chronologically as I moved toward the back, decades compressed into layers of paper. The 1980s, the 1990s, the early 2000s, and then, near the far wall, tickets from recent years. Tickets I recognized, tickets I'd printed. My breath caught. I pulled one from the wall, hands trembling. It was dated 3 months ago. The route, the timestamp, the fare amount, all matched my records. And at the bottom, my signature, Russell Hayes. I hadn't placed this ticket here. I didn't even know this corridor existed until 10 minutes ago. I scanned the wall, finding more. Dozens of tickets bearing my name, my handwriting, my transactions. They were interspersed with others. Older tickets, different operators, different eras. But mine were there, unmistakably present. At the far end of the chamber, I noticed another door. It was identical to the panel I'd entered through. Same flush design, same concealed keyhole. I approached slowly, every instinct screaming at me to turn back, to leave this place and seal the corridor behind me. I used the master key. The door opened into another corridor, longer this time, sloping gently downward. The walls here were bare, but the air was colder, and I could hear a faint mechanical hum, the sound of ventilation or distant machinery. I followed the corridor for what felt like 5 minutes, though time seemed distorted in the enclosed space. The hum grew louder, more distinct, until I recognized it. the ambient noise of a ticket booth, the printer's idle whir, the hiss of the ventilation system, the faint crackle of the intercom. The corridor ended at a third door. This one wasn't concealed. It was a standard booth entrance marked with a faded placard, Booth 4. I was in Booth 4. I'd been in Booth 4 for 6 years, but this door suggested there was another Booth 4 somewhere beyond the corridor, separated from the station's normal geography. I unlocked the door and stepped through. I was in my booth. Identical layout, same equipment, same scuffed flooring. But the perspective was wrong. I was standing behind the operator's chair, looking out through the glass divider toward the concourse. Except the concourse was empty. No passengers, no trains, no signs of life. Just harsh fluorescent lighting and the faint echo of ambient noise, like a recording played through distant speakers. The terminal screen was active, displaying the fare system interface. I moved closer, checking the logs. Transactions were listed, time-stamped in real time, corresponding to sales I'd made earlier tonight. But I was looking at them from this booth, this duplicated space, not the original. I glanced at the booth's entrance door, the one that should lead back to the concourse. I tried the handle. Locked. I used the master key. It didn't turn. The door remained sealed, as though it had never been designed to open. I checked the intercom panel. The light was on, indicating an active connection. I pressed the button, intending to call the control center, but no sound emerged. The channel was open but silent, as though the network existed but carried no signal. I turned back to the corridor entrance, the only exit I knew. The door was still open, the passage beyond dark and waiting. I left the duplicated booth, retracing my steps through the corridors. The chamber with the ticket stubs felt larger now, the walls more oppressive, the layers of paper thicker. I passed my own tickets again, dozens of them, and noticed something I'd missed before. They were arranged in chronological order, but they extended beyond today's date. I stopped, scanning the wall. Tickets dated next week, next month. Transactions I hadn't processed yet, routes I hadn't sold, passengers I hadn't served. All signed with my name, all logged as completed. I pulled one from the wall. Dated 2 weeks from now, 11:34 p.m., a transaction I couldn't possibly have completed. And beside it another dated 3 months from now, then 6 months, then a year. The wall was filled with future tickets, hundreds of them stretching forward in time, documenting transactions I would eventually process, passengers I would eventually serve, a routine I would repeat indefinitely. I reached the final section of the wall where the tickets became sparse, the paper darker. The last ticket was dated 5 years from now. No route, no fare, no passenger name. Just a timestamp and a single phrase stamped across the center. Service complete. I staggered back, colliding with the opposite wall. The corridor felt narrower, the air heavier. I forced myself to keep moving back through the passage, back to the panel behind my original booth. I emerged into Booth 4, my Booth 4, gasping, pulling the panel shut behind me. I locked it, tested the handle to confirm it was sealed. The keyhole disappeared, blending seamlessly into the wall as though it had never existed. I sat at my desk, hands shaking, trying to process what I'd seen. The corridor, the chamber, the tickets, the duplicated booth. None of it should exist. None of it appeared on the station's schematics, in the maintenance records, in any official documentation. But the master key had opened it. The key I'd been issued, the key every operator carries, the key that's supposed to open only authorized doors. I checked the terminal, looking at tonight's transaction log. The entries matched the tickets I'd seen on the wall. Sales I'd made hours ago, now documented in a place I shouldn't have been able to access. And at the bottom of the log, a pending transaction dated 2 weeks from now, exactly matching the future ticket I'd pulled from the wall. I think every operator is connected to the corridor. Every booth has a hidden passage leading to the chamber, and every chamber contains the operator's history, past, present, and future, documented in paper and cataloged by time. And at the end of every corridor, a duplicated booth waits, occupying the same space but existing in a version of the station that's slightly removed from reality, where transactions are processed in parallel, where operators continue their shifts long after they believe they've left. I've checked the panel every night since. The keyhole reappears intermittently, always in the same place, always accessible with the master key. I haven't opened it again. I'm afraid of what I'll find. Afraid that the chamber has expanded, that more future tickets have appeared, documenting years I haven't lived and transactions I haven't made. But I know it's there, waiting. And I know that eventually I'll use the key again because the corridor is part of the job, part of the infrastructure, part of the routine that operators are bound to repeat. The master key opens everything, even the places that shouldn't exist. And once you've seen the corridor, you can't forget it. You can't unsee the tickets, can't ignore the future laid out in faded ink and yellowed paper. I have 5 years left, according to the wall. 5 years until service complete. And I don't know if that means retirement or something else. But the key is on my ring, warm and waiting. And the corridor is always one turn away. Story 11. The booth rotation schedule. I looked at the rotation schedule, saw my name locked in place beside booth 4 for the 312th consecutive day, and when I finally opened the booth door to demand an explanation, the corridor beyond was unfamiliar. The walls older, the signs in a language I didn't recognize. My name is Morgan Fletcher, and I've worked as a booth operator at Crescent Line Station for 3 years. The Transit Authority has a strict rotation policy. Every 7 days, operators switch booths to prevent burnout and ensure familiarity with all station positions. It's a sensible system, designed to keep staff alert and adaptable. The schedule is posted digitally each week, accessible through the personnel portal, and assignments are generally balanced and predictable. Except mine haven't rotated in 312 days. I didn't notice immediately. The first few weeks blurred together, and I assumed I was simply being reassigned to booth 4 due to staffing needs or personal preference. But after a month, I started paying attention. Every Monday, the new schedule posted, and every Monday my name appeared beside booth 4. I checked the rotation patterns for other operators. They moved regularly, cycling through booths 1, 2, 3, 5, and 6. But I remained fixed, locked in place. I contacted HR, asked if there was a reason for the static assignment. They reviewed my file, confirmed that I should be rotating, and promised to correct the error. The next week's schedule posted. I was still in booth 4. I escalated the issue to my supervisor. She checked the system manually, admitted the assignment was unusual, and submitted a formal correction request. The following week's schedule posted. Booth 4 again. After 3 months, I stopped complaining. The other operators joked about it. "Fletcher's married to booth 4, they'd say, laughing. But the humor felt forced, and I noticed they avoided lingering near my booth, as though proximity might trap them in the same static assignment. I started documenting the days, a tally on a notepad, simple and methodical. Day 47. Day 98, day 156. The count grew steadily, and with it a creeping sense of dislocation, as though I were being slowly separated from the normal flow of station operations. By day 200, I noticed other changes. The booth felt different, not physically, but atmospherically. The ambient sounds of the station grew muted, as though filtered through layers of insulation. Passengers approached less frequently, and when they did, their voices seemed distant, their faces slightly blurred. I thought it was fatigue, the psychological effect of prolonged routine, but the sensation intensified daily. I started testing my surroundings, looking for tangible proof that I was still connected to the station's normal operations. I checked the terminal logs. My transactions were recorded, processed, archived correctly. I'd review the security camera feeds. I appeared clearly, interacting with passengers, performing my duties. Everything seemed normal except the undeniable fact that I hadn't left Booth 4 in over 6 months. On day 250, I tried to leave mid-shift. I stood up, walked to the booth door, and turned the handle. It opened easily, revealing the corridor beyond. But the corridor was wrong. The walls were older, the paint faded and peeling in places I didn't recognize. The floor tiles were a different pattern, hexagonal instead of square, yellowed with age. The signage was present but updated. Station names I didn't know. Route maps that didn't match the current system. I stepped back inside, closed the door, and reopened it. The corridor remained changed, stubbornly unfamiliar. I contacted security on the intercom, asked them to verify the corridor outside Booth 4. They reviewed the camera feed and confirmed everything looked normal. Standard walls, standard flooring, standard signage. "You're seeing things, Fletcher," the guard said. "Take a break. Get some air." But when I opened the door again, the altered corridor was still there, persistent and undeniable. I didn't leave the booth that night, or the next. I remained inside, processing transactions, filing reports, maintaining the routine, while the corridor beyond slowly transformed into something increasingly alien. By day 300, the corridor had regressed decades. The walls were bare concrete, the lighting dim incandescent bulbs, the signs hand-painted in styles from the 1970s. When passengers approached my booth, they entered from the concourse as always, but when I glanced through the booth's rear window, the one facing the corridor, I saw a station that existed in a different era. I started researching the station's history, looking for explanations. Crescent Line Station was built in 1968, renovated in 1994, and updated again in 2010. The architecture I was seeing through the rear window matched the original 1968 construction, but the station had been substantially altered since then. The corridor I was looking at shouldn't exist anymore, not in its current form. Unless I wasn't looking at the present. Unless the corridor was anchored to a different point in time, and my prolonged assignment to Booth 4 had gradually shifted my perspective, pulling me away from the current station and into a version that existed decades ago. On day 312, I decided to test the theory. I would leave the booth, enter the corridor, and see where it led. I opened the door at the start of my shift before any passengers arrived. The corridor was fully regressed now, 1968 in every detail. The walls, the floor, the lighting, the signage. Even the air smelled different, tinged with old paint and cleaning solutions no longer used. I stepped through. The door closed behind me, and immediately I felt the shift. A subtle change in atmospheric pressure, a flicker in the lighting, a sense of being displaced. I walked down the corridor, following the path I knew by memory. It should have led to the main concourse, but instead it opened into a smaller, unfamiliar area. A waiting room with wooden benches, timetable boards displaying routes I didn't recognize, and passengers dressed in clothing from another era. They moved slowly, quietly, unaware of my presence. I approached the timetable board. The date displayed at the top read November 9th, 1968. I turned, looking for the booth, for any landmark I recognized. Booth 4 was there, occupied by an operator I didn't know, a woman in a uniform style that predated the current design. She was processing transactions, handing tickets through the slot, her movements mechanical and routine. I approached her booth, tapped on the glass. She didn't look up. I tapped again, harder. No response. I was invisible to her, to the passengers, to everyone in this version of the station. I walked back to the corridor, searching for the door I'd entered through. It was gone. The corridor extended in both directions, symmetrical and featureless, no exit visible. I don't know how long I wandered. Time felt distorted, elastic. I passed other booths, other operators, all working their shifts in quiet isolation. Some were recognizable. Colleagues I'd worked with, though their faces were younger, their uniforms different. Others were strangers, operators from eras I'd only read about. Eventually, I found another door. I opened it and stepped through, and suddenly I was back in Booth 4, sitting at my desk, the terminal displaying the current date and time. The rotation schedule was open on my screen. Day 313. I checked the corridor through the rear window. It was normal again. Modern walls, current signage, familiar layout. But when I opened the door and looked outside, the corridor flickered, unstable, alternating between present and past with each glance. I think Booth 4 exists in multiple timelines simultaneously, anchored to the station's history, and prolonged assignment has synchronized me with those alternate versions. I've been working the same shift for 312 days, but in different eras, in different iterations of the station, overlapping and intersecting. The rotation schedule won't update because I'm not part of the current roster anymore. I'm part of the permanent assignment, the operator who's always in Booth 4, across every version of the station that's ever existed. I just checked the schedule. Day 314. And the corridor is flickering again, pulling me deeper into the past, deeper into the routine that never ends. Some booths don't rotate, some operators never leave, and some shifts last longer than a lifetime. Story 12. Receipt number 000. The receipt was impossible. Serial number 000, printed by a machine designed to start at 001. And at the bottom, where the operator's digital signature should have been, was my name written in handwriting that looked like mine but aged, shakier, as though written by my hand decades from now. My name is Clayton Morris, and I've operated the night booth at Fairmont Station for 4 years. The receipt printers are simple thermal units programmed to generate sequential transaction numbers starting from the 001 each day at midnight. The system is rigid, automated, incapable of deviation. Every receipt is numbered, logged, and archived. There are no exceptions. 3 weeks ago, I found a receipt numbered 000. I arrived for my shift at 10 p.m., logged into the terminal, and began the standard opening procedures. The receipt printer was idle, the tray empty. I ran a test print to confirm functionality. Receipt number 1001 emerged, perfectly normal. At 4 a.m., during a lull in passenger traffic, I glanced at the printer and noticed a slip of paper in the tray. I picked it up, assuming it was a test receipt I'd forgotten. But the serial number made me freeze. 00. I stared at the number, uncomprehending. The system doesn't print 000. It's not in the software's sequence. The numbering starts at 001 in increments with each transaction. There's no provision for a 0th receipt. I checked the transaction details printed on the slip. Date, today time, 04:03 a.m. Route, Fairmont to Hollow Point Station fare, 475. Operator, Clayton Morris. Hollow Point Station didn't exist. I'd never heard of it, never seen it on any route map. I checked the system database, no match. I searched historical records. No station by that name had ever been part of the transit network. At the bottom of the receipt, where the digital signature should have been stamped automatically, was a handwritten signature. Clayton Morris. My name, my handwriting, but subtly different. The letters slightly shakier, the loops less precise, as though written by an older version of my hand. I hadn't made this transaction. I hadn't been at the booth at 04:03 a.m. I was on break in the station's back office reviewing the night's fare reports. But the receipt existed, physically present, time-stamped with precision. I logged into the transaction history, searching for entry the Myodatuzandulun. No record, The log showed the others in one, the test receipt I'd printed at the start of my shift, followed by subsequent transactions in correct sequence. Receipt and didn't exist digitally, only physically. I kept the receipt, slipping it into my jacket pocket. Over the following days, I checked the printer obsessively, waiting for another anomaly. None appeared. Receipts printed normally, numbered sequentially, without deviation. Until a week later, when I found another. Receipt 1000, identical serial number, different transaction. Date, today. Time 03:47 a.m. Route, Fairmont to Windridge Terminal Fare, 6.00. Operator, Clayton Morris, Windridge Terminal. Another station that didn't exist. The handwritten signature at the bottom was mine again, slightly more deteriorated, the letters thinner, the strokes uneven. I compared the two receipts side by side. Same serial number, same impossibility, but different transactions. Both time-stamped during my shift. Both routes listing destinations I'd never heard of. I started researching the station names, Hollow Point, Windridge, looking for any historical reference. I found fragments, proposals from the 1980s for expanded transit lines, plans that were never funded, stations that were designed but never built. Hollow Point Station was part of a 1984 proposal to extend service into the northern industrial zone. Windridge Terminal appeared in a 1991 development plan for suburban expansion. Both projects were abandoned due to budget cuts. They were ghost stations, conceptual, never realized, existing only in archived blueprints and forgotten committee reports. But I was printing receipts for them. The receipts continued appearing, 1 or 2 per week, always numbered 000. Always signed with my progressively deteriorating handwriting. The routes varied, but the destinations were always ghost stations, places that had been imagined but never constructed. Then 2 nights ago, the receipt changed. Receipt 0,000 date, today. Time 04:15 a.m. Route, Fairmont to Fairmont Fair, 0.00. Operator, Clayton Morris. A route that began and ended at the same station. A fare of $0, and at the bottom my signature, barely legible, the letters collapsing into wavering lines. I stared at the receipt, hands trembling. This wasn't documenting a passenger transaction. This was documenting something else. A loop, a return, a journey that goes nowhere. I checked the timestamp, 04:15 a.m. I looked at the clock, 04:14 a.m., 1 minute from now. I waited, watching the printer. At exactly 04:15 a.m., it activated, spitting out another receipt. I grabbed it before it settled in the tray. Receipt, 0,000 date. Today time, 04:15 a.m. Route, Fairmont to Fairmont Fair, $0. Operator, Clayton Morris. The signature at the bottom was fresh, the ink still warm. And I realized with cold certainty that I was looking at my own handwriting. Not aged or deteriorated, but written in real time by a hand I couldn't see. I looked at my own hand, resting on the counter. It wasn't moving, but the signature on the receipt was being completed as I watched, the letters forming stroke by stroke as though an invisible pen were tracing them. When the signature finished, I felt a strange heaviness in my fingers, a phantom sensation of having just signed something, though I'd done nothing. I think the receipts are documenting journeys I'm taking without awareness, routes I'm processing in some parallel version of my shift. Receipt 0,000 exists outside the normal sequence because it's not part of the station's current operations. It's part of the station's potential operations, the routes that were never built, the shifts that never officially began. And the handwriting deteriorates because I'm signing these receipts across different points in time, my hand aging with each iteration, documenting transactions that span years or decades. The most recent receipt, Fairmont to Fairmont 0.00, suggests I've stopped traveling outward. I'm looping back, returning to the origin, processing a fare that costs nothing because there's nowhere left to go. I've started keeping all the receipts in a folder. 23 so far, all numbered 0000, all signed with variations of my name. The signatures are forming a progression, a timeline of my hand's decay, and I've realized something horrifying. The receipts are printing in reverse chronological order. The first one I found, Hollow Point Station, was signed with the oldest handwriting. The most recent, Fairmont to Fairmont, was signed with the youngest. I'm moving backward through the receipts, approaching the point where the sequence begins, and when I reach receipt the Mama 1000 with my current handwriting. When the progression completes, I think I'll understand what the 0 means. Not the start of the sequence, the absence of it, the fare that's never collected, the route that's never traveled, the operator who's never confirmed as having arrived. The printer just activated. I can hear it now chattering in the silence of 04:15 a.m. I think it's printing my final receipt, and I think this time I'll have to sign it myself. Story 13. The Customer Complaint. I read the complaint form, the passenger's description of a station that didn't exist and a route that led nowhere, and at the bottom, where he'd signed his name, the handwriting was unmistakably mine. Clayton Morris. My name is Felix Brennan, and I've been the booth operator at Riverside Terminal for 5 years. Complaints are rare but expected in transit work. Passengers disputing fares, questioning routes, reporting delays. We have a standardized process. The passenger fills out a form, I log it in the system, and it's forwarded to customer service for review. Most complaints are resolved within a week, either with a refund, an explanation, or an apology. 2 months ago, a passenger filed a complaint that still haunts me. He approached my booth on a Tuesday evening, calm and polite, and requested a complaint form. I handed him the paperwork and a pen, assuming it was the usual grievance: overcharged fare, rude staff, service disruption. He filled it out methodically, taking nearly 10 minutes, writing in small, precise handwriting that filled every available line. When he returned the form, he looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Not anger, not confusion, but something closer to resignation. "I hope you can fix this," he said quietly. "I went where you told me, but it wasn't there." "I'm sorry," I said, taking the form. "What wasn't there?" "The station, the destination, the place you said the train would go." He paused, then added, "I don't think that line goes anywhere anymore." Before I could respond, he walked away, disappearing into the evening crowd. I read the complaint form. Passenger name, Thomas Everett. Date of travel, yesterday route, Riverside Terminal to Ashford Junction. Complaint, operator provided incorrect information. Ticket purchased for Ashford Junction, but train did not arrive at listed destination. Ended at unidentified station. No signage, no staff, no exit. Spent 3 hours attempting to find way back. Requesting refund and explanation. Below the formal complaint, he'd added a handwritten note in the margin, squeezed into the limited space. The train stopped at a platform that wasn't on the map. The lights were on, but no one else got off. I waited, thinking it was an intermediate stop, but the train left without me. The station was empty. No signs, no schedules, no intercom. I walked through the corridors looking for an exit. The walls were concrete, unmarked. I found another platform eventually. A train came. I boarded. It brought me back here. But I don't think I went to Ashford Junction. I don't think that's where the line goes anymore. I checked the route information. Ashford Junction was a standard stop on the Blue Line, serviced regularly, well-maintained, and heavily trafficked. I pulled up yesterday's schedule. Trains had run on time. No service disruptions, no anomalies reported. I logged the complaint into the system and forwarded it to customer service, noting that the route information was accurate and suggesting the passenger may have boarded the wrong train or misread the signage. The next morning, I checked the complaint log to see if it had been processed. The entry was gone. Not archived, not marked as resolved. Simply absent from the database as though it had never been filed. I searched by passenger name, by date, by route. No record. I checked the physical forms in my filing cabinet. The complaint form was missing, the space where I'd placed it empty. I contacted customer service, asked about the Thomas Everett complaint. They had no record of receiving it. I tried to dismiss it as an administrative error, a misfiled document that would resurface eventually. But 2 weeks later, another passenger approached with an identical complaint. Different name, different date, same route. Riverside Terminal to Ashford Junction. Same description of an unmarked station, an empty platform, a train that took hours to return. I logged the complaint, filed the form. The next morning it was gone. This happened 4 more times over the following month. Each passenger described the same experience, boarding a train to Ashford Junction, arriving at an unidentified station, struggling to return. Each complaint was filed, logged, and then erased from the system overnight. I started keeping photocopies documenting the complaints before they disappeared. I compared the handwriting across the forms, looking for patterns or inconsistencies. The names varied, the phrasing differed, but the core description remained constant. A station that shouldn't exist, accessed via a route that officially terminated at Ashford Junction. Then I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The handwriting was changing. Subtly across the complaints, the script was morphing, becoming more uniform, more familiar. By the 6th complaint, the handwriting looked unsettlingly similar to my own. I compared the photocopies to a sample of my handwriting. The loops, the slant, the spacing, increasingly identical. Last week, a 7th complaint was filed. The passenger approached, filled out the form, and handed it to me without a word. I looked at the name, Felix Brennan, my name. I stared at the form, unable to process it. The passenger had listed his name as Felix Brennan, the same as mine. The route, the date, the description, all matched the previous complaints. But the handwriting was unmistakably mine, stroke for stroke, indistinguishable from my own. I looked up to confront the passenger, but the booth's window was empty. No one was there. I glanced at the concourse. Passengers moving normally, no one standing near my booth. I looked back at the form. It was still there, real and tangible, filled out in my handwriting, signed with my name. I read the marginal note. I sold myself a ticket to Ashford Junction. I boarded the train. I don't remember arriving. I don't remember the station. But I remember the corridors, empty and cold, and the train that eventually came to bring me back. I don't think I ever left. I think I'm still there, somewhere between the route and the destination, processing complaints about a journey I keep taking. I checked the complaint log. The entry appeared, logged under my name, time-stamped 5 minutes ago. Then as I watched, it began to fade, the text dissolving pixel by pixel until the screen showed no record of it. I grabbed the physical form, held it tightly, determined not to let it disappear. But when I looked down, the paper was deteriorating, the ink fading, the words becoming illegible. Within seconds, the form was blank, just an empty sheet of paper. I think the complaints are coming from passengers who've taken the route I keep selling. A journey to Ashford Junction that no longer terminates where the maps say it should. Somewhere along the line, the route diverged, continuing past the official endpoint into a station that exists outside the transit system's normal geography. And the passengers who go there, they don't come back fully. They return physically, but part of them remains in the unnamed station, filing complaints that can't be processed, describing a place that can't be acknowledged. And now I'm one of them. I checked the schedule. I'm supposed to work tonight, same shift, same booth. But when I looked at the route maps, Ashford Junction was missing. The blue line terminated one stop earlier, at Riverside Terminal, and the map showed no continuation beyond. I searched the historical records. Ashford Junction existed until 2 months ago, when it was quietly removed from all official documentation. No announcement, no explanation, just an erasure. I think the station is still there, still operational, but it's been disconnected from the acknowledged network. Trains still run to it, passengers still board, but officially it doesn't exist. And the complaints are evidence of that disconnect. Testimonies from people who've traveled to a place the system refuses to recognize. I found the photocopies of the complaints I'd made. I spread them across my desk, reading through them again. The handwriting progression was clear, each complaint written in script that increasingly resembled mine, culminating in the final form signed with my own name. But I don't remember filing a complaint. I don't remember boarding a train to Ashford Junction. I don't remember arriving at an unnamed station. Yet the complaint exists in my handwriting, describing a journey I must have taken. I think I've been making the trip repeatedly without conscious awareness, and each time I return I file a complaint about a destination I can't remember reaching. And each night the complaint is erased, removing evidence of the journey and resetting my memory, allowing me to sell the same ticket again. Tonight I'm going to board the train myself. I'm going to take the route to Ashford Junction or wherever the line actually goes now, and see what lies beyond the end of the map. I'm writing this before I leave, documenting my intention so that if I return without memory, there's a record of what I chose to do. The train leaves in 10 minutes. I've already purchased the ticket, one way to Ashford Junction. The receipt printer just activated, though I didn't touch it. A single slip of paper emerged. Receipt Summer 2000 Sirona. I think I've made this journey before, and I think I'm about to file another complaint. Story 14. The Booth That Never Closed. I locked the booth at 6 a.m., powered down the terminal, turned off the lights, and walked away. But when I glanced back from the concourse, the window was still glowing, and through the glass, I saw a figure sitting in my chair, motionless, waiting. My name is Iris Canton, and I've operated Booth 5 at Belmont Station for 9 years. The closing procedure is routine, mechanical. Count the cash drawer, reconcile the digital logs, power down the terminal, lock the booth, submit the shift report. Every morning at 6 a.m. I complete these steps exactly, and then I leave. By the time the day shift operator arrives at 7 a.m., the booth should be dark, locked, and empty. But for the past 3 months, it hasn't been. The first time I noticed, I was halfway across the concourse, heading for the employee exit, when I glanced back out of habit. The booth window was glowing. Soft interior light visible through the glass divider, the same light I'd just switched off. I stopped, confused. I'd definitely turned off the lights. I'd checked twice, part of my routine, but the glow was unmistakable, steady and bright. I walked back, thinking I'd triggered some fail-safe or backup system. When I reached the booth, I tried the door. Still locked, the key still in my pocket. I peered through the window. The terminal was off, the chair empty, the cash drawer closed, everything as I'd left it. But the overhead lights were on, casting their fluorescent glow across the interior. I unlocked the door, stepped inside, and flipped the light switch. The lights turned off. I waited a moment, then relocked the booth and walked away. From the concourse, I looked back. The lights were on again. I reported it to maintenance. They tested the wiring, found no faults, and suggested the switch might be sticking. They replaced it. The next morning, the lights were on when I left. I started documenting it. Photos taken from the concourse, timestamps logged, evidence that the booth was active despite my closing procedures. I showed the documentation to my supervisor. She reviewed the security footage. The cameras show you turning off the lights, she said, scrolling through the recording. But then, about 10 minutes after you leave, they turn back on. How? The footage doesn't show. One frame, they're off. Next frame, they're on. No one enters the booth. What's turning them on? She didn't have an answer. She submitted a work order to the electrical engineering team. They inspected the booth, found nothing unusual, and concluded it was a timer malfunction. They disabled all automatic systems. The lights stayed on. Then I started noticing the cash drawer. Every morning when I returned from my shift, the drawer was empty. I counted the cash at the end of each shift, locked it in the drawer, and submitted the total in my report. The day shift operator was supposed to take over with the same starting balance, but when I opened the drawer the next night, it was empty. No cash, no coins, no receipts. I contacted the day shift operator, asked if she was removing the cash. She said no, she started each shift by counting the drawer as I'd left it. But according to her logs, the drawer was always empty when she opened it. The cash was disappearing between the time I locked the booth and the time she unlocked it. Security reviewed the footage. The recording showed me locking the drawer, leaving, and the booth remaining sealed. No one entered, but when the day shift operator arrived and opened the drawer, the interior was empty, as though the cash had been removed by invisible hands. "Where's the money going?" I asked. The security officer shrugged. "Either the footage is corrupt or someone has access we can't track. Or it's being processed," I said quietly. Processed. Sold. Transactions during the hours when the booth is supposed to be closed. He looked at me like I was delusional. There's no one in the booth. But I knew there was. I could feel it, a presence lingering in the space long after I left, continuing the work, processing fares, selling tickets to passengers I couldn't see. I started staying later, past my official end time, sitting in the concourse and watching the booth. At 6:15 a.m., 15 minutes after I'd locked it, I saw movement. A silhouette, visible through the glass divider, sitting at the counter. The figure was indistinct, backlit by the interior lights, but the posture was unmistakable. Hunched slightly, hands moving across the terminal, processing transactions. I approached slowly, watching the figure through the window. It didn't turn, didn't acknowledge me. I tried the door. Still locked. I knocked on the glass. The figure didn't react, just continued working, hands moving methodically. I pulled out my phone, took a photo. When I reviewed the image, the booth appeared empty. No figure, no silhouette, just the interior, lit and waiting. But I'd seen it. I was seeing it now through the glass, as clear as anything. A figure performing my routine, mimicking my movements, operating the booth in the hours when it should be closed. I called security, demanded they send someone immediately. A guard arrived, reviewed the booth through the window. "I don't see anyone," he said. "Look closer, at the chair." He squinted. "There's no one there, Iris." But I could see it. The silhouette sitting exactly where I'd been sitting an hour before, processing fares I hadn't sold, engaging with passengers I couldn't perceive. I went home, exhausted and unsettled. I tried to sleep, but the image lingered. The glowing booth, the figure in my chair, the routine continuing without me. That night, when I returned for my shift, the booth was dark, locked as it should be. I unlocked it, turned on the lights, logged into the terminal. The cash drawer was empty, as expected. I counted out the starting balance from the safe, loaded the drawer, and began my shift. At 2 a.m., the intercom activated, a passenger's voice calm and polite. "One ticket to Riverside, please." I processed the transaction, printed the ticket, slid it through the slot. I glanced up to see the passenger collect it, but the window was empty. No one there. The ticket was gone from the tray. I checked the transaction log. The sale was recorded, payment received, ticket issued. But I hadn't seen anyone approach, hadn't seen anyone take the ticket. I stood up, looked through the glass at the concourse. A few passengers moved in the distance, but none near my booth. The intercom activated again. "One ticket to Ashford Junction, please." I processed the sale. The ticket printed. I watched it slide through the slot and disappear, taken by hands I couldn't see. This continued throughout the night. Passengers requesting tickets, transactions processing, payments received. But I saw no one. The booth was selling tickets to ghosts, or to passengers who existed in some version of the station I couldn't perceive. By 6 a.m., the cash drawer was full. I counted it, 3 times the usual amount, far more than the passenger traffic I'd witnessed could account for. I submitted the report noting the discrepancy and locked the booth. As I walked away, I glanced back. The lights were on, the figure was in my chair, and the routine was continuing. I checked the security footage later that day. The recording showed me sitting at the booth processing transactions, interacting with passengers. But the timestamps were wrong. The footage showed me working at 7 a.m., 9 a.m., 11 a.m., hours after I'd left. "This isn't me," I told the security officer. "I wasn't there." "The footage says otherwise. Then the footage is wrong." But I knew it wasn't. The figure in the recordings was me. Same uniform, same movements, same routine, except it was a version of me that hadn't left, that continued working long after my shift ended, operating the booth in perpetual service. I think I've been splitting. Every night when I lock the booth and walk away, part of me remains, continuing the routine, processing fares, engaging with passengers who exist in a version of the station that overlaps but doesn't quite align with reality. And each morning when I return, the part of me that stayed is still there, waiting, ready to resume the next shift. I've tried breaking the pattern. I've tried skipping shifts, requesting time off, avoiding the booth entirely. But the schedule pulls me back. The routine reasserts itself, and I find myself unlocking the booth, logging in, beginning the same transactions I've processed 1,000 times before. Last night I stayed until 6:30 a.m., past my shift end, watching the booth from the concourse. The figure appeared as always, sitting in my chair, but this time I saw it turn, saw it look directly at me through the glass. It had my face. Older, more tired, but unmistakably mine. I approached the window, stared at the version of me still working inside. It didn't move, just watched me with an expression I couldn't read. Not hostility, not fear, just recognition, acknowledgement. I raised my hand, pressed it against the glass. The figure inside mirrored the gesture, our palms separated by the barrier. We stood like that for a long moment, and I realized she's not a ghost or a glitch or a malfunction. She's me, the version that couldn't leave, that became part of the booth's infrastructure, operating it forever because the routine demands continuity, because the station requires someone to be there, always, regardless of schedules or shift changes, and I'm becoming her. Each night, a little more of me stays behind until eventually there won't be a difference between the operator who leaves and the operator who remains. The booth never closes because I never leave. I just keep working, shift after shift, across versions of time and existence that overlap and intersect, processing fares for passengers who may or may not be real, engaging in transactions that accumulate into a routine so complete it transcends the need for a single continuous operator. I think tonight will be my last shift, or maybe it won't. Maybe I'll lock the booth, walk away, and glance back to see myself still sitting there, waiting for the next passenger, continuing the work that never truly ends. Because some booths don't close, some operators don't leave, and some shifts last forever, documented in glowing windows and empty cash drawers and silhouettes that move in the hours when no one should be there. The booth is waiting. The passengers are waiting. And I think I've been waiting too, for the moment when I finally stop pretending I ever really left. The light is on, the terminal is humming, and my chair is occupied. I think it's time to go back.